But
All right, here we go. Now we are actually recording.
oh, we are. Okay.
Yeah. You know what's funny is people don't know, but we just recorded the first 10 minutes without recording it.
That's true. And I'm going to throw you under the bus because you have all the buttons by you and I have nothing over here.
Completely screwed that up. Hey, welcome back, though, to week 2 of season 2.
Week 2 of season 2. And this is our first official, like, where we're really talking about what didn't happen on Sunday.
Yep.
And so this will be a good one. And for those of you who didn't listen to the sermon, I recommend go listen to it because this is going to highlight it. This is a nice way to kind of just talk a little bit about it. But it was on Rahab.
But now, before we begin, though, I think it's important. I was told this podcast needs to be more professional.
So then we probably should not be doing this anymore. We need to hire someone else to do this.
I've been saying that for a long time. But this week, I spent the entire week working on intro songs for our podcast because I think I listen to other podcasts and they have like intro songs. And I think, well, we should have an intro song. Okay. And so I all week long, I've been in the studio. And this is what I've come up with. Two different ones. You pick the best one you want.
Okay.
Here's the number one.
What do you got? Lay on me.
It's Chris and Steve with the mic in hand, digging through truths that don't quite land. The bits and pieces that didn't get said, from the pulpit to the podcast instead. Woo! Not for Sunday mornings, no halos here. We're breaking it down with a laugh and a cheer. Knowledge nuggets flying wild and free. Welcome to the chaos, grab your coffee.
That's kind of a fun one.
Very 20,000 century. I like that. It was enjoyable. Knowledge nuggets and all.
Knowledge nuggets. We're always using that.
Yep.
We're going to have merch. Knowledge Nuggets shirts.
Okay. I'm looking for it.
Yeah,
They're going to be like, draw a little like chicken nuggets on there?
Don't wreck the surprise.
Oh.
All right, here's the second intro.
All right, go.
Yeah.
A little
For Urban Crowd.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah. Yo, it's Chris and Steve bringing heat to the mic, dropping knowledge nuggets, keep your Sunday tight, talking sermons past with a vibe that's real, not for Sunday mornings, but you know the deal. Breaking down the word with the rhythm and rhyme, pulling out the truth one nugget at a time. Convos deep, but the vibe stays light, not for Sunday mornings, but we shining bright. Not for Sunday mornings, it's a podcast jam. Chris and Steve got the mic in hand, dropping knowledge nuggets like it's contraband.
Yeah.
Tune in and listen, you'll understand.
Someone needs to revoke your license to AI.
No way. I got some more later too, but we'll get to that.
Okay,
later, so.
well, if I had to vote, I liked number one.
Of course
they were both good, but I enjoyed number one. It was a little.
Number 2 is better, but that's okay.
Well,
We'll let the crowd. All two
I was going to
of you.
say, I've heard you up on the pulpit rapping before. So
That was me.
Yeah. I could tell. I could tell that was coming from you.
So we did Rahab.
Rahab.
And we called her
the
Rahab
Homemaker.
the Homemaker. Yeah.
Yep. And if you're unfamiliar with Rahab, go look her up.
She's not a homemaker.
She is not a homemaker by profession, but it was a choice.
Yeah.
It was a choice to make that change of her name. And so I'll let you explain that a little bit later, but I think it's important to state, we always talk about what we liked from the sermon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the most impactful part, and it was intentionally you did it to make it the most impactful part, was when you really led into the idea that the Bible doesn't polish her past.
No.
In fact, she's an Old Testament character from the book of Joshua, and yet when we read about her in Hebrews, when we read about her in other books of the New Testament, she's not referred to by a clean name. She's referred to by her professional name.
Yeah.
And so it never leaves there. And so to have that and to your spin on it, not spin, but the way you presented it is that we all come with that past. We all have that. And for you to get up there and say, here's my past. Here are the things that I've had and that don't define you, but make you who you are in that case.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing for Rahab. And then to point to people in the crowd and to say, John the homemaker or Sue the homemaker or whoever, like as you did that, like I know like that's an impactful idea to when we actually put ourselves in that position and to have people and point to them and say, even though they're not that quote unquote homemaker, but we all have that in that past.
Yeah. That was fun. It was this week, that early in the week when I was up, or as we've been months, but earlier this week, when I started looking at that, and that's what stood out to me in the New Testament was when she called Rahab the homemaker, although it's, not homemaker.
Sure.
And I was like, man, that bothered me so much. And then I thought, well, what if we spun it and changed her name early and said we were doing it for the kiddos because the kids are in the room, we want to protect their ears, but intentionally do that for that too, but more importantly, because at the end we're going to pull that back up and say how we do that to our own past and our own history and how we cover that up. And I think about my own life and how I don't share that part or lead with that part, and I don't want to say I hide that part, but we do bury that part a little bit. And that was actually a point of stress this week, was trying to figure out when to and how much to share of my story, because I didn't want the sermon to be about Steve, and I thought if I came out there with some extreme thing, the message would be lost on what it's really about. And so tried to walk that line a little bit, and not did good or bad, but it was fun. It was a fun week. It was a great week. It was a lot of fun. And
yeah, I agree. When we get up there and it's hard to not put ourselves in those positions, it's the easiest thing to do, but it's not always the right thing to do.
Yeah.
We don't want to take away from the message and make it about us. And, I think an image that came to my mind, there's a movie called Leap of Faith with Steve Martin.
Yeah.
And there's a point, he's a traveling preacher who kind of puts on a show, and he doesn't really have the faith that you would expect a preacher to have. And he gets called out on it in this small town, and he admits, he's like, yeah, I did drugs, but who do you want to talk to you about drugs? Someone who did or someone who didn't?
Yeah.
And not that we look into that, not that we want to have those experiences, but we do have those experiences because we come to Christ as a broken person, and he's the one that makes us better.
Yeah.
But we can't forget where we came from at that point.
No, and I think that's the important part is it's not about us in that moment. It's about what he's done for us. And so our homemaker profession is look at what he's done.
Right.
And so
I'm not the homemaker anymore.
Right.
I am now whole in Christ at that point.
Yeah. So it was fun. It was a good week. On a technical point, I'm trying to learn how to speak slower. I guess I talk very fast. And
so for Inside Baseball, Steve always wants to know about how long he's going, and he's always in there. But when we compare
word count,
he's about double my word count.
Yeah. So in about 28 minutes, however long I'm up there, 31 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm at 4,700 words.
Yeah, and I'm usually somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500. And if I'm at 2,500, I know I'm going to go long. So,
yeah. So I've got to figure out how to talk slower. So I'm gonna figure that out.
He's doing better. And if those of you who come first service versus second service, he does slow down second service most of the time. So
not really. I'm gonna figure that out. But it was a hard week though too. It was a difficult week.
And we talked about it earlier too. And I know like you and I, when we have to have a conversation about, hey, I'm thinking about this, it is going to be a hard week because we're struggling with the word, we're struggling with the message, and so I knew this one was going to be a difficult one, and given the nature of the matter, who the person was, just by itself naturally makes it difficult.
But it was cool. It was great. I think this is one of my favorite characters, and.
And I agree with you because you said up there, like, every week I get up here, I'm going to say this. And it's going to be hard not to. Yeah. It really is. Like, because looking at the ones I picked, I'm like, I picked them because they were my favorites, And I'm going to be honest right now, my last one on Esther is going to be probably the hardest because it's the one I know the least about.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of why I saved it to last.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping it becomes one of my favorites.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So
cool.
All right, so what do we got here? So
what didn't make the sermon?
What didn't make the sermon?
What was not for Sunday mornings, as it were?
That's true.
Do I need to play the theme song again?
No, we're good. We're good.
So one of the first things, I've got a few things here I wrote down. First was asking the tough questions. I love to ask the hard questions when I read text, and so one of the questions I did ask was, why did the spies go here? Which I thought was kind of a fun question, because why would the first place they go to her house? You know, and again, we're kind of dancing around. I think we can, but... Yeah, why would they go to her house?
Right.
And so we talked a little bit about that. But then one of the questions I didn't get to, did Rahab lie? Because here she is. The guys come to her house and say, "Where are the bad guys?" Or what they think are the bad guys, and she lies. I mean, she tells them they're not here. She doesn't know them, that they went outside, and all the while they're hanging out upstairs. And so, what do we do with that?
Oh, that's a question for me. What do we do? Oh, what do we do when
Well, did she lie?
Did she lie?
Is it okay to lie?
So I would say it, based on the text, if it's a lie, it's a lie of omission. So
how do you say that? She says they're not here. I don't know them.
I don't know them biblically, or I don't know them.
Well, that's the other thing. So that word "no,"
no means a couple different things.
There can be,
and so we'd have to go into the Hebrew and see where that's at. And I haven't, so I can't answer it. So
I think of it as like when the Nazis come and they say, "Are there Jews in the attic?" And what do you say? No, right?
Right.
So you're lying, but
you are.
But when you're at war, I think things are a little bit different. And again, I think in this moment, she is siding with God and His army versus the enemy's army, and this lie wasn't to exalt herself like Satan's first lie. This was to save the life of other people, really, and of the spies. And so I think there's a line there. Now, this has been wrestled with through ancient writers, especially old Jewish writers. Did she lie? Did she not lie? Was it okay? Was it wrong? And so it's not like a cut and dry issue, but it's also not the main issue. That's why it didn't make Sunday morning. I didn't want to get distracted.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's always going to be. Yeah, I think even in Christianity, when you read the Bible, there's gray areas, right? And we like to think that everything goes black and white.
Yeah.
But there's not. Like, you even look at when you go through the law that Moses handed down, there were times that that law was never followed. I mean, it talks about when a child's disrespectful to their parents, they're supposed to get stoned. I don't know many parents that are going to stone their kid or allow for that, right? And so it's not that. So there's gray areas that pop up, and so I think because if we want to address the idea of lying, obviously lying's wrong, right? But you have Abraham who built his entire career on lying, essentially, and but for all of these, I think it boils down to that God can redeem.
Yeah, and this is why it wasn't in the Sunday morning, because we can go.
It's a tough one. Yeah, we can go all over on that one.
So another thing that didn't make the sermon Sunday morning was the way people have looked at Rahab's past in different eyes, and I call it a whitewashing history. I don't know if that's the correct term or appropriate term, but like Josephus, who was a Jewish historian who lived wrote shortly after the time of Christ, he referred to Rahab as an innkeeper, because he took the word harlot means zona, and the verb zone is to feed, and so he said that she's an innkeeper and that she was running like a bed and breakfast rather than what she was actually running. And so whenever she has this revelation of that God is the God of the heavens and the earth, he says that's because she has divine inspiration. She has a vision from God because she's an innkeeper. So that's how he spins her. Whereas I read that, and I think others read it as, no, she did what she did, and she was in an environment where the people talked a lot, and so she heard these stories, and then she came to a conclusion based on the stories that she heard. So that was one of the things we didn't really kick around too much. Again, not too many. Another thing was the symbolism. There's a lot of symbolism in this story, and I didn't want to get lost in the weeds on that, but 3 days is repeated 4 times in the first 3 chapters of Joshua, and we know 3 days in the New Testament refers often to resurrection,
right.
And in the Old Testament, a lot of with a recreation moment. When she says, "I'm going to hide them up under the flack," or whatever, up on the roof under the flack, that's a material that is found in funeral linens, and the word hide is the same verb that's used when Moses kills a spy and then buries him in the sand, hides him in the sand. And so you put this 3 days with the men going off into the hills, and then you've got this death resurrection thing there that can be played into a little bit.
Interesting.
And then the scarlet cord. I did talk a little bit about that.
You did, yeah.
And the blood of the lamb over the Passover and the scarlet cord. And then, but what was really neat, and this was something, was Rahab was a homemaker, and she follows in the line of Tamar, who dressed herself as a homemaker. In fact, if you look at Jesus's genealogy, every mother can be identified as a homemaker in one way or another. Like Tamar dressed like a homemaker when Judah slept with her. Rahab is a homemaker. Ruth comes to Boaz at night like a homemaker. And then Bathsheba is treated by David like a homemaker. And so you've got these stories where we see God moves to rescue, not to reject. He doesn't toss aside the ones that the world calls unclean. He draws them in. He invites them into something new and beautiful. The story is this: God sent his son to save a woman trapped by the world, stuck in a life she never wanted. And Jesus is the groom who gives everything, even his life, for the bride. And through his death and burial, he purifies her, makes her whole, brings her home. And we see this in Joshua 2, and it just lines up with the bigger picture we see throughout the Bible, which is, I think, my hope through this series is that we see this thread throughout.
Right, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And I don't remember what I was reading, because Tamar just came up in something I was reading, and I can't remember what it was. But that's interesting, like that I guess I didn't. So for me, I guess I didn't realize or ever think about that these individuals were considered homemakers or portrayed in that light.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how to process it. That's a fascinating idea.
Thank you very much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
You very much.
Yeah. Okay, well,
we don't practice this, so
we don't.
It's kind of fun to drop things on you.
Yeah.
But the big thing we did left out, and I talk about in the sermon, was like the argument of faith and works, because
you did bring that up. Yep.
Because Rahab is mentioned in Hebrews and she's mentioned in James, and in James she's finishes at the end of a chapter where he goes on about works, and often when we read about works, we think about Paul, who kind of have a differing. Allegedly a different opinion of faith over works. And so I want to kind of dig in a little bit about that. I think when we talk about faith, we love the idea of faith saving us, but what happens when that faith demands something of us? And as we're going to walk through this faith and works thing, I think we're hopefully going to see the demands that our faith does put on us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like when I think about Rahab, well, first it began with she had minimal information, right? She really only had what she had, and yet she had massive trust. She hung the scarlet cord out there, which is obedience through risk. In fact, I had a quote here that said, faith is not believing in spite of evidence, but obeying in spite of consequences. And I think that's a fun line, because it's going to come a point where the rubber hits the road, and will you obey in the middle of that, And you think about the information that Rahab had, which was so minute. And in fact, I was talking with a friend after service about this. But now look at the information we have. We have the full Bible, the Holy Spirit, the cross. We have all of this. We see the whole story. And so we have no excuses for our faith not being moved. If she had just this little sliver, she had just a story.
Right, yeah, right.
And she said, well, this is the God of the universe. And we have everything, and we're like, I don't know. We really have no excuse. And then another point from this is that faith is not just a belief, but it's a faith. It's a behavior. And James 2 talks all about this. Faith without works is dead. Faith without works is dead. He says, show me your faith without works, and I'll show you mine by what I do. Faith isn't invisible. It's evidenced by love, service, and obedience. In fact, John Calvin wrote, it is faith alone that justifies, but faith that justifies can never be alone. And I think that's that connection of faith. Show me what you're doing through your faith. Now,
right.
Do the works save us, or does faith save us? And that's what. So for Paul goes on and he says in Ephesians 2, for by grace you've been saved through faith, and this is not of your own doing; it is a gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God had prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. And so you look at Paul, who seems to take this bent of it's just about faith without works, and James, who says, hey, show me your works because of your faith. And they can seem like they're polar opposites,
Right, and they're not.
No.
They're complementary to each other. And I think that's where a lot of things falls. People get confused about it because when you look amongst different denominations and everything, you'll see big arguments over these ideas.
Yeah, and I think we're looking at two different letters written to two different situations. So Paul is fighting legalism, right? Works without faith. And James is fighting laziness, faith without works, right? Like, hey, all I got to do is believe, and I'm good, hands off, going to heaven. He's like, what are you doing? If this is really what happened in your life, this should change your life. in everything you do. I mean,
Right,
if it's
exactly.
really what it is. So I think what people do get lost on is in Galatians 5:6, Paul says, faith expressing itself through love. And I think that's where you see him kind of bridge the two of faith and works. And so any misconception of like, well, it's one or the others, but he bridges those two, and so, and then James, again, chapter 2, if you read James chapter 2, it's a crazy chapter. James talks about a dead faith and a living faith. And that he says even the demons believe, so they have a faith,
Right.
And so that real faith changes you. And he talks about Abraham being justified by faith before God in Genesis 15, where he says, go into a land that you just go. You're going to go and make you a great nation. Go. And then also by his works, though, because in Genesis 22, he's told to take his son Isaac and sacrifice him.
And that's a big one. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a work that, right? There's a you're going to trust me in this? Are you going to do this? You know?
Well, and you go through, so you have the works aspects, right? And then you go into Hebrews, and I think it's chapter 11 that we call I call the Hall of Heroes.
Yeah.
That's where the idea of faith that everyone in there is by faith,
Yeah.
right? But there is an action to faith. Faith is not just belief. It's in spite of, or because there's been something that has led you to that point.
Yeah.
And so yeah, the faith and works thing, it's a very controversial topic.
But it doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to be. No, I agree. And then there's a book, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's were you going to hit on him? Okay, so he has a book called The Cost of Discipleship, and it's probably one of the more challenging books I've ever read, because it really does lay into you and say, what are you doing? If there's no cost to you being a Christian, then are you a Christian at that point?
Right.
And
cheap grace and costly grace.
Yep.
Right. Cheap grace is forgiveness without repentance, faith without obedience, where costly grace calls you to die to yourself and follow Jesus. Right? Yeah. And there's a cost to that, and the faith must both be belief and obeying. Right. There's this handshake of them both, And I wrote, you obey because you trust, but sometimes you trust more through obedience. Like as you begin to walk this walk, and that following Jesus isn't passive. It means burning the boats and stepping out in faith. And that there is I think one of the saddest things of this faith journey, and it's not just in our time today. I mean, you read Paul's letters, all that, is this lazy faith where it's like I just show up just to do the bare minimum. I believe in Christ, but it doesn't really affect anything else in my life. And like do you really believe in Christ? Because has Christ really changed your life? Because it's really changed your life. That changes everything. I mean, it changes everything.
And I think of like Paul and in the book of Hebrews, where there's this scolding that comes out in terms of like talking to people who they talk about like you're still on milk but you should be on bread, right? Yeah. And scolding them like why are you still at this point? Like you should be mature at this point, and you're not. Yeah. And so what is it that we as Christians are doing that are prodding other Christians along, and where are we in that walk too? You know? And I'll admit, like for me, my 20s were wasted, in terms of Christ and whatnot. In terms of like I had been baptized at 10, but I didn't really mature, I wouldn't say, till my late 20s and start really looking into and working. And a lot of that has to do with discipleship, working with other mature Christians who can help you and walk along with you and help that. And I think that, in my story at least, that's what led me to become a more mature Christian, to studying more, to praying more, and working in that scope.
Yeah. I think when you look at James, you look at Rahab, who didn't just believe, she acted. Abraham didn't just believe, he obeyed, and we're called the same. We're called to do the same. It's not to earn salvation, because we can't earn salvation, but it's because real faith always moves. Real faith always loves. Real faith always works. That's what it does. It's an outgrowth of what we believe.
Right.
You have to do that. It's not even it just comes out. It's almost it just happens. You know what I mean? Like,
no, yeah, right. It's you. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Like, and there was a way I've heard it expressed before, but like your faith becomes so much a part of you that it's those fruits of the Spirit, right? Like they just show up.
Yeah.
You're like, just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you display the fruits, and the fruits don't mean that you're a Christian, but they show up more often when that comes to be.
Yeah, we talked about that in our fruit of the Spirit series, where we can't produce the fruit,
right?
But we can create an environment where the fruit can be produced, and then it's God's will or desire to push that out. I did have some questions though I came up with to help people, because I think as we look at the faith and works thing and maybe challenging people with that, questions that we can ask ourselves to kind of walk through where we are on what we believe, and do our lives match up to what we believe. And the first one was, have I ever had a moment where I realized deep down that I am broken and actually brought that to God? When is that time where I've realized like I've got nothing, I'm hit rock bottom? And for me, I remember this time, Audrey and I just got married, and again, we were kind of living sideways lives a little bit, and I remember kneeling down in front of my computer and telling God, if he could still use me, I would be willing. I want to give him all of it if he would still use me. Like, here I am. I need you. I can't do with this. Just completely broken. I grew up in the church. I grew up with the faith. I grew up with all this stuff. Kind of ran away from all that, and so figured I was done. Like, my life's over. I burned all that. It's over. And so, but there was just this part of me was like, I need you, and if you're willing to still use me, here I am. And just really open myself up. And I'll never forget that moment. I was on my knees. It was a moment where I came to the brokenness of who I was and that I needed Christ. Now, another question is, has there been a time when I genuinely felt the weight of my choices and I knew I needed help, like I really needed to be rescued? Have you ever felt that complete desperation where it's like, I can't do this on my own anymore? Again, these are questions that people can process.
I mean, I could think about, for me, like a couple of these were when I first started teaching my first job, and I knew they weren't going to rehire me right before tenure, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I came in on a hard job market, and I just didn't know where to go. And so part of that was just being broken, because like when we get fired from places, like, am I not good enough?
Yeah.
There's that question there. And then the weight of my choices too, that was a struggle for me, because I had prayed and I talked to my wife, and I had said to her, I'm like, look, I'm going to apply for teaching positions till May 30th, and I'm done. And that when that May 30th date hit and I still didn't have a job, and the weight of that choice was still on my shoulders, like I had a plan of what I would do instead. But it was hard. It was tough to walk through that, and to know that I was relying entirely on God at that point. Like I trusted that if this is what he wanted me to do, if this is where he needed me to be, he would put me in that place. And it works out great in the end. I'm not going to go through the whole story, but yeah.
Another question, do I really get the gospel, not just the words, but what it means that Jesus died and rose for me? Do I know that I can't fix myself on my own? And I think this is a hard one, because we think if I just do ABC, if I just pray more, if I just read the Bible more, if I just and there's nothing we can do to fix ourselves at all. It's all by what he did. And when we can realize that it was done on the cross and it's over, we can rest in that freedom. And it's a different, you're not trying to earn anything. It's already done. And that's hard. That's one of the hardest conversations I have with friends is.
Right. And then that's where that idea of works does come into play, is because it's not that I'm trying to earn that, but what I'm trying to do is by doing these other things, I'm hoping that I improve just in general.
Yeah.
It's a weird line, and that's why I think so many people struggle with that faith and works idea.
Yeah.
But to understand, why are we doing these things and going from there?
Yeah.
It's not about fixing us.
No,
we can't.
No, not at all. Not at all. And then my last question was, can I point to a real change in my life because of Jesus? Am I growing or just coasting? Would anyone who knows me say, yeah, they've been with Jesus? What does my life look like because I'm following Christ? And I think that's a gut punch question, a question that, but also a question we should be asking ourselves. How is my life different because of what Jesus did in my life?
Right. And I don't know when you got baptized. I was 10, and I've always struggled with, like, because I don't know, I've always been in the church. I've always been a part of the church, and like I said, I know my 20s were wasted, but I feel like since then, since that my maturity has happened, that I've gotten better. Am I perfect? No, I'm not at all. I'm sitting here doing this podcast with you, and people hear my thoughts and words. And when I preach on Sunday, they hear my thoughts and words.
Yeah,
and,
unfortunately.
Yeah, I know. I apologize for it every single time too. So.
Me too.
But yeah, I mean, that's a very important question: is where are you? Are you in the same spot? Again, going back to Paul, going back to Hebrews, and looking at, are you still drinking milk or are you eating bread? Are you actually feeding other people at this point? And I hate that as an idea that we don't come to be fed, but are we doing the feeding to other people? How are we impacting them because of Christ?
Yeah, and again, that's a slippery slope of like, I need to do more.
Right.
And I think it's like, that's that line of like, I think the more mature I get in following Christ, I realize how much more I need him and how undeserving I am. And yet his love overwhelms me because he's done this for me. And so it just shows me how great his love is for me, and that there's nothing I can do to earn it, and nothing I can do to. No. I used to be a person that would be like, if I don't read my Bible every day, if I don't pray every day, then I'm a bad person, and I'm not worthy, and I'm never going to be worthy. It doesn't matter how much I read, because the flip side of that is when I do read my Bible every day and I do pray every day, all of a sudden now I'm the man, and pride comes in, and it's such a subtle, so subtle. It's so subtle, and I would much rather be on the other side of like, there's nothing I can do to earn this. Now I want to read, and I want to pray, and I want to worship, and I want to, that comes from a place of love and of overwhelmedness of what he's done for me, not because I have to do it. And
yes, yeah, exactly. And so like my thing, what I was trying to get at was just simply saying, again, it's that outgrowth, right? It's we do these things not because we have to, but because they're an outgrowth of the change that Christ made.
And recognizing how much, I say this a lot with people that want to learn how to pray. I had a person come a couple years ago and we're like, am I praying the right way to God? And I'm saying the right things when I pray to God. And I likened it to my Noah, my son, who never ever calls me because he's a boy. And boys don't call home, I guess. I don't know. And so he never called me. But when he does call me, it doesn't matter what he says to me. Just the fact that he calls me is like, oh, my son called me. And I think about us with our Heavenly Father. Just the fact that we reach out, he's our Father. And there's just, we don't have to get the words right. We don't have to say the words right. He loves us as we are, not as we should be. And because we're never going to be as we should be. Right. And so resting in that, I think, stop trying to earn this stuff, stop trying to go after it. That doesn't mean we don't do those things, but it's from that place of a heart behind it. Right. You know? And so that's a hard line. What is your heart behind what you're doing? You know, because on the outside, it's going to look the same. Like, yeah, Steve's praying. Am I praying because I'm trying to pray to earn something, or am I praying because I'm so in love with what he's done for me and what he's done in my life and who he is, that I'm praying from that? Right. On the outside, it looks like I'm praying, right? But what's my heart look like? And that's the growth part, is to keep examining my heart and resting in who he is. And so, yeah, so that's the faith works thing. Sorry, that's why I didn't make Sunday morning. And
because it's a hard debate. It's a hard conversation. And it wasn't
really the point of the message.
It's not the point, right?
Not that message, yeah. Right. Yeah. So we had a couple questions.
Okay, what do we got?
Right. So, you have the one question.
Okay, so one question was asked to me on Sunday, and I brought it to you, and I knew where you were coming from, but I don't know that everybody else did. Yeah. So when you were preaching, you talked about how Rahab and Joshua were married. Yeah. Now, if we go, I believe the genealogy is in Matthew, right? Yep, and if we look at the genealogy of Christ, which you mentioned Rahab is a part of, there is no mention of Joshua and Rahab being spousal individuals.
There's not. There's actually mention of Rahab and Salmon. Yep. Salmon. I can't ever pronounce that word. Salmon. Being married. Yeah, I know. I must have lied.
So I know that you didn't lie, but
so what I should have done, and so it speaks to the first week doing the series. So I should have said Jewish tradition teaches this, because while the biblical tradition says Rahab married Salmon, blah, 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 Jewish tradition, especially through the Midrash, which is the oral tradition that's been passed down, was written down. Now, that happened 1,000 years after the New Testament. So, again, I want to preference all that. But as you read Jewish historians, I would say a majority, if not more than a majority, well, more than a majority of them believe that Rahab married Joshua. Now, why did Matthew say this and all that? And again, we can get into all the debate. I should have said on the front end, Jewish tradition teaches this versus making it come off as like a fact that this is that. And I think as we do this series, you and I have talked a little bit about, like, we're going to push into areas that are going to be a little, not controversial, but are going to push some.
They're going to push, and they're going to make people uncomfortable in those ideas.
Yeah, we're going to bring in, extra biblical text. Again, not as authoritative, and that's where I should have separated it. So I messed up. I messed up in that. And I should have just said Jewish tradition says blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Christian tradition or says blah, blah, blah. But I screwed that one up.
Yeah,
but,
well, I'm gonna really trip over that one in this coming weeks. So
good. You're talking about Rahab again.
No. No, I got the more controversial one actually.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
So then the second question I got was from a friend, and they were wondering about. I had talked about how at the end there how we didn't know we were blind until we knew we were blind. Like, so we didn't know we were a homemaker until we realized we're a homemaker, right? Our eyes, right. So we acted like a homemaker because that's a homemaker's act,
right?
Until our eyes were opened, then we can. And what matters is not so much our life prior, but in that moment where we decide to follow Christ. And so this person said, well, what about the moments when we did know better? What about the choices made not out of ignorance, but out of exhaustions or defiance, when it felt easier to give up and give in? If grace covers the past before we knew God, what about the failures that come after? Is there still forgiveness when disobedience wasn't accidental, but deliberate?
So, my answer is yes.
No. Yes.
Yes. The answer is obviously yes. Like, because that is the power and the amazingness of grace.
That's what happened on the cross. That's the power of the cross, which we don't.
Right.
We don't really. That in that moment, it's
gone.
Yep. Forward, they're forgiven.
Right. But grace is what covers us in that.
Yeah.
Right. And so, Paul. Now, we have to say, don't do that, right?
Well,
like, I mean, we don't want to deliberately do things.
I would say if you're so this is where I would argue that cheap grace, costly grace. Like, first of all, if you're worried about this, you're fine, because if you're worried about it,
you're thinking about it, and which is, you're trying not to. And
or the other side is like, what, I made the decision to follow Christ. I'm just going to do whatever heck I want. I'm good. I checked off. I got my go to heaven card. I'm done.
Well, that's Paul's argument, right? That so grace abounds when I sin more, so I want more grace.
Right.
I might as well go out and sin. But
right.
but then he stops and he says, "But hold on a second."
Right. And I would say, have you ever really felt the weight of what Christ did for you? Because when you feel that, it's like, oh, it changes everything. It changes everything. And so I think this process of growing in that, Paul talks about working out your salvation. In fact, Philippians, I have it here. It says, Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. That this idea of we are working out our salvation, that we are going to screw up, that we're going to mess up, that we're going to drop the ball. There's times when we're going to be exhausted and tired as human beings in a world that is not our own. And we're just going to say, I'm just going to make this decision. It's going to be a bad decision.
I'm going to make the easy decision sometimes.
It's going to be, I'm exhausted, right? And then do we come back to God in that moment and say, Lord, I'm sorry. You're working out your salvation, right? You're working. You're not going to be perfect. Again, that's that bent of I have to do to try to get to some spot that you're never going to get to.
Right.
You're never going to be perfect.
And the analogy I always use when it comes to Christians is that we're just smelly onions.
Yeah. Yeah, right? Explain that a little bit.
Yeah,
you stole that from Shrek.
I did. I told you that yesterday. I stole that from Shrek. But the idea is that when we get baptized, before we accept Christ, we're not aware necessarily of the sins that we have. Right. We may realize that we do some things wrong, but to really be convicted of being a sinner and sinning. I don't believe it's something that really happens until we accept Christ. And once that happens, that's when Christ can start to work in on us. And so just like an onion has layers, and each one is gross and disgusting, and we cry whenever we have to cut into them and all that, Christ is going to work on that. Mm-hmm. But Christ is going to pick what's the most important thing that he wants to fix first. What's the one that he wants to convict you of first? And that's that outside layer. And you're going to work on that, and he's going to work, and he's going to help peel that away. And it may and do our own resistances and the way that we work with Christ and the way that we accept the Holy Spirit's help and all that kind of stuff. It may not be fully taken off, but we're going to expose that next layer that Christ can say, okay, you're working on this, but it's not going to be perfect because you're never going to reach that perfect state. But do you get to that next layer? Now this is the next problem that we got to deal with. And the problem is that the smelly onion never goes away, right? It's every layer. There's just another layer of something to work on, and that goes back to that idea that we're never going to be perfect. We're going to strive to be like Christ, but we're never going to reach that point.
Yeah, and that's why I think where Paul says, I like this verse here because he says, "Work out your salvation," but right before that he says, "Therefore, my brother," which again is always read it in context. So, how do you work out your salvation? Well, if we go back to the beginning of the letter, he says. Well, yeah, he says, so if there's any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourself. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also the interest of others. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form. He humbled himself by being obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee shall bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue shall confess that Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And that idea of how do you work out your salvation? It's through obedience. It's through humbling yourself, dying to yourself, of giving your life away, of looking to the other, and that's that process of growth that happens more and more. That
dying to yourself, that's the I really think that's the biggest one, because I think that's the one a lot of us just struggle with.
Well, dying to yourself means you die,
right?
And death is hard,
right? It is, right? But
and final.
But I know, like, yeah, it's a rough one. But yeah, I am 100% in agreement with that. You know, and that's funny you pulled that verse out, because I was going to pull that out on Sunday too.
Good.
So
good.
Yeah.
All right. So that was what was not for Sunday morning, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. Now we have a segment we're starting this week to try to get Chris to get a tattoo. So I think we were getting closer because we needed like 3 likes or something. I think we're at 7, or 6 or 5.
Oh, I was selling the podcast to everyone. I was
good.
Like, go.
Good. Well,
go subscribe. We're
going to do this thing called the Melchizedek moment. And Chris every week is going to tell us who this person is. But because, again, I've worked all week in the lab, I got an intro theme song for this as well.
Of course.
So I want you to listen to this. Tell me which one. I got a couple of them. So tell me which one.
Oh, we got 2 to choose. Okay.
I got 3, but here we go.
All right. A little hip hop.
Yeah, a little hippie.
Yeah.
In the ancient scrolls, a name appears so sleek. Melchizedek, the priest and king, so unique.
I haven't heard that pronunciation before.
No father, no mother, no beginning, no end. A mystery wrapped where the scriptures bend. Melchizedek, moment breaking it down. A priestly king with a heavenly crown. No start, no finish, he's eternal, they say. In the shadows of history, he paves the way. He met Abraham.
Yeah, so those are the first 2. We won't go to verse 2.
Okay.
So that was 1, and then I got 1 here. I think this is probably more up your speed. So.
I think you actually sung that one though, because it mispronounced
auto-tune?
and the auto tune.
Yeah, definitely. Here's the one I think you're gonna like. Woo!
Oh, you know me and my show tunes.
Bible's mystery man coming in hot. Melchizedek's here to stir the pot. Chris breaks it down, Steve's confused again, with knowledge nuggets from beginning to end. It's the Melchizedek moment.
Let's go!
Oh, you even memorized this song.
Oh, I've been listening to it all week. That's the second one. So I do have a third one. This one's, I think, maybe my favorite. I don't know. Let's see if you like this one. All right.
Yo, Steve.
What's up?
It's time to break it down. Chris is here with knowledge profound. Not for Sunday, but it's still the deal. Melchizedek's story about to get real. The Melchizedek moment, here we go.
Here we go.
Dropping that wisdom, let it flow.
Let's go.
Kings and priests from the ancient script. Chris got the facts to make the mic flip. Who's this guy with bread and wine?
There's a couple verses.
A king and a priest all intertwined.
Those are our three intro songs to the Melchizedek moment.
I will allow the audience to vote on those. I love how each one pronounced every single time his name came up was pronounced differently.
Yeah. So what do you got for us?
Okay, so I love the story of Melchizedek because I love the Bible mysteries that exist out there, and this is a profound Bible mystery, I feel like. So in Melchizedek, if you've never heard of him, it's okay because we're going to spend 10 weeks doing this, 9 weeks doing this. All right. So he shows up in Genesis 14. These
are short segments, right?
Yeah.
Okay, a moment.
Yeah, moment. So for like 3 verses, that's where he comes from. And basically in there, he goes up to Abraham, gives him some bread and wine, and then he just simply vanishes. Like we never hear of him ever again. Like that. Yeah. And so it's weird. Now he's called at the time the priest of the God Most High. Now, if Abraham's the father of Judaism, essentially from the very beginning, it's weird that this guy already recognizes God as, Yahweh as God Most High in the thing. And so this is an idea before Israel. This is before Moses, before the 10 Commandments, like before all these things that we put down. He is a priest and a king of the God Most High.
Okay.
And so it's kind of weird too there because the king and the priest are usually separate individuals.
Yeah.
And so we got a guy who is both the king and the priest. And so it's kind of weird that we're adding these things. And so we just keep compounding problems and problems and problems. Now, the really cool part about it, though, is Hebrews pulls back Melchizedek. So he's got these 3 verses, right, in Genesis, but there's a whole chapter to him in Hebrews. And the beauty of it is that the author of Hebrews is comparing Christ to Melchizedek.
Okay, so we're going to walk through all that.
Yeah, so we'll be able to walk through that. So
cool.
Yeah, but it's fun. I recommend reading him. He does have he has a mention in Psalms, I think, somewhere too.
Okay.
But his big moment really breaks out in.
So today's moment is he gave food and disappeared.
Gave food and disappeared. Yep.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, okay. Now our last segment of the podcast. We have
this
segments.
is going to be a really, really lame segment every week if I'm just giving a couple facts on them.
Well, that's all you're building on it.
I know. You're right.
Okay. Our final segment of the week is what is coming up. So it'd be nice to give a little preview of what is the next character we're going to look at.
Okay.
Just very brief preview. So next week you're going to talk about Noah.
We are talking about Noah. So Noah, I think, doesn't need any introduction. I think almost everybody listening probably knows him and has heard of him. So we're going to be talking about him, and we're going to be looking at his story and pulling out some really niche ideas that are in this story. So like you said, we're going to push the envelope a little bit. Now, what I will tell you is what's going to probably end up on the podcast that's not going to end up in the sermon is we're not going to debate Noah, right? This is not about this. We're going to take a story, and we're going to look at a story. And we're going to look at it through the eyes of the people who it's written for, right?
Cool.
So this was written for ancient Hebrew individuals, Israelites, and so what is the purpose of Noah's story? What are we going to pull out of that? And that's the goal of the story. And
that's
I'm
awesome.
hoping to bring some really interesting things to it on Sunday.
Well, you're talking, so they won't be interesting, but they'll be there.
Well, nobody will be there anyways because they know I'm talking, so
I'll be there.
I appreciate that.
Both services.
Which is unusual. Usually you're not there.
No,
when
I come
preach.
to both services.
No. Usually you're not there when I preach. Yeah.
Usually I'm out of town.
Yeah, usually you're out. So.
I'm going to be in town. I'm coming back just to hear you talk.
Yeah.
All right. So that was week 2.
Week 2. Yep.
Smash the subscribe button, the like button.
Subscribe, smash the like button.
Don't do any of that.
No, this is weird because we haven't been to this point yet because we were just kind of keeping it hidden from the world, and now we're out there. Yeah, we should have.
We're out there, all right.
So yeah, if you do like it, if you do subscribe, or if you really thought we did fine, you can tell your friends. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on iTunes.
Well, yeah, Apple Music, everywhere.
Apple Music,
Apple Podcasts, whatever it's called.
Whatever it is now. Yeah,
okay.
Apple Pod. Yeah.
All
so
right.
anyways, all right. Well, thanks for listening. I know we droned down a little bit there, but thanks for showing up and appreciate the conversations.
See you next week.
Yes,
Yo, Steve. It's time to break it down. Chris is here with knowledge profound. Not for Sunday, but it's still the deal. Melchizedek's story about to get real. The Melchizedek moment, here we go. Dropping that wisdom, let it flow.